Accepting everything, expecting nothing. Keep coming back to the present moment, where everything you've ever wished for already is.
Hello, I'm Yoah Wexler, and I'm going to be your guide on this journey of enlightenment. Have you ever looked up into a dark night sky, staring at 100 million stars looking back at you and wondering, who am I? How did this all come about? Is there a purpose and a meaning to life? These enigmas are at the core of this program about enlightenment and the Enlightenment Intensive Retreat. Here's a quick overview of what's ahead in the program.
Part 1 clarifies what is enlightenment and explores what different people and traditions have to say about the enlightenment experience.
The way it's classically described is that there's an at-oneness. There's no difference between the observer and the observed. It is the same.
Part 2 introduces you to the Enlightenment Intensive Retreat and explores its origins and history.
Tell me who you are.
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 Yes. It could be just like or similar to a Japanese Zen sesshin, in which people intensely work on who are they, but instead of working alone, it would be in the context of a dyad.
Okay, why with it? And left me.
And Part 2 also explains how the process of enlightenment is accelerated when honest communication to a partner is combined with meditation.
Feel energy in my head and this discomfort in my stomach.
What is enlightenment? In recent years, the word enlightenment has increasingly been used to describe expanded or altered states of consciousness. But what is it really describing? I've talked to many people about enlightenment. Some people have a clear understanding of it, but most people have a mistaken or preconceived idea with regards to what enlightenment is.
It's just so, enlightenment experience is just it.
I'm sorry, but I never heard this word.
I think it's just awareness of self and awareness of the transitory nature of the universe.
It is absolute. It has such a strong feeling of absoluteness. This is it. It's this is all mine.
What enlightenment is comes from the word light, and enlighten would be to lighten up one's mind.
You can't talk about it. You can't describe. You try to tell somebody about it, and it's like they don't get it. They don't understand. There's no words. There's no terminology. There's nothing in this life that compares to it. There's no way to describe it or talk about it. Period.
Later in the program, we'll hear more about enlightenment and the enlightenment experiences from some of these people.
Some people understand enlightenment because they've experienced it. Others understand it because they have a clear definition of it. But most people are confused about it. While it's true the word enlightenment is not the thing itself, having a clear idea of what the word means can be helpful to remove confusion or ignorance. Let's see how the dictionary and the encyclopedia defines the word enlightenment.
To illuminate, to see or comprehend the truth of something you want to know, to free yourself from a state of ignorance.
The dictionary also says that the English word enlightenment originally referred to the 300-year period known as the Age of European Enlightenment from the 13th to the 17th century. This Age of European Enlightenment ushered in a renaissance of new ideas and rational thinking that has profoundly changed the way people live their daily lives, and its effects are still with us today. It brought Western civilization out of the dark ages of church dogma, unquestioned authority, superstition, and sexual repression. This new age of liberated thinking valued rational thought, social democracy, science, discovery, and the Industrial Revolution. This new age of enlightened thinking grew from a materialistic philosophy and a worldview that saw matter as the basis of reality and existence. The 17th century French philosopher-scientist René Descartes expressed this philosophy when he wrote,
Je pense, donc je suis. I think, therefore I am.
This materialistic philosophy says that knowledge of oneself and one's world comes only through the use of reason, intellect, and logic. This philosophy of life has had a profound effect on Western civilization and has become increasingly established as a firm point of view in Western education and social life.
As the materially focused West rushed into the 20th century, the speed of change in Western civilization continued to increase at such a dizzying pace that in spite of the material well-being, large numbers of people began to feel as if they were living in a vast, mechanized, and personal world that they had no individual control over. A world obsessed with chasing material power, control of society and individuals, and domination over nature. In the face of this technological hyperchange, more and more people began feeling lost and disconnected from their traditional ways of life. This alienation caused a growing number of people to look into themselves and to ask, who am I? And what is the purpose of my life? Looking for answers to these fundamental questions about the meaning of life started another renaissance of self-discovery and enlightened thinking at the turn of the 20th century. Looking to the West for answers, people found Freudian psychoanalysis. By the 1960s, people found humanistic psychology and the activities of the human potential movement. And by the 1970s, people turned to transpersonal psychology and the flowering of the spiritually based New Age movement. Looking to the East, people discovered the practices of yoga, meditation, and the non-materialistic philosophies of Asia. Looking within, they found personal mysticism and revelation.
It's so silly. We keep on playing games to find out who I am, who another is, what life is.
In their search for the meaning of life, Westerners traveled the world, learning about other cultures and religious traditions. They visited spiritual teachers, saints, and holy people, inviting them to teach and settle in the West. They read books on spiritual subjects, attended courses on spiritual well-being, and learned new theories and models of consciousness. This Eastern influence brought new words and ideas into the English language that described various meditative states of awareness. And that's how the word enlightenment began to change. It became the word often used to describe expanded states of awareness.
Initially, the word enlightenment referred to that renaissance of thinking that began around the 17th century in Europe. It meant to free oneself from ignorance and superstition, using the power of one's intellect to reason and logically figure out the truths of life. Now, in the 21st century, the word enlightenment continues to mean going beyond ignorance. However, now, going beyond ignorance also means to go beyond the limitations of reason and logic, and using the powers of focused concentration and meditation to reveal what the Zen Buddhists and other explorers of consciousness call direct knowing or direct experiencing of reality.
In the 1970s, Zen Buddhist meditation teacher Philip Kaplow translated the Japanese word satori into the English word enlightenment. Kaplow says satori is the elevated state of self-realization that all Zen meditators aim for. This is also the state of consciousness that practitioners of the Enlightenment Intensive retreat set out to experience.
心の目を開くこと、
Opening the mind's eye,
真の本質を悟ること、
or awakening to our true nature, is how Zen Buddhist meditation masters poetically describe satori, or the state of enlightenment.
Buddha ist Natur,
Erleuchtung,
Sunyata, christelijk bewustzijn, realiteit, Atman, directe ervaring.
People around the world point to the enlightenment experience and call it by many different names. But regardless of what you call it, the Zen masters of Japan remind us that the idea of enlightenment is not the thing itself.
月を指していても、それ自身月ではない。Pointing at the moon is not the moon itself.
The Englishman and theologian Alan Watts was one of the first writers to popularize the subject of enlightenment and meditation in the West. He wrote that to know what enlightenment is, and especially what it's not, you have to experience it directly for yourself. There's comparatively very few people on earth who've experienced the state of enlightenment. Those few who have often refer to it using such words as direct experience.
Charles Berner created the Enlightenment Intensive in the late 1960s. In the following lecture, given in the early 1970s, he spoke about enlightenment.
It's impossible to define, can't be done. But we can take some words and point in that direction that have some value. I've used direct experience. Direct experience as the definition of enlightenment. The experience takes place, but there is no experiencing. In the state of enlightenment, there is no difference between that which one is enlightened on and the one who is enlightened. There's no difference. It's them. It and them are the same. There's no separation. And there's no sense of having come into that experience. The process which one has been going through is no longer applicable.
In a booklet called Enlightenment, Charles Berner wrote that enlightenment is the direct experience of the truth. He wrote that a direct experience occurs by no way or no via, not by seeing, thinking, believing, deciding, reasoning, or feeling. Jeff Love has directly experienced enlightenment for himself. Jeff was one of the early participants and leaders of the Enlightenment Intensive retreat, and began facilitating these retreats in the early 1970s. Jeff talked to me about what enlightenment is and described briefly some of his personal experiences.
What word could you use aside from enlightenment for the process that people go through? Well, of course you could use awakening. You could use higher consciousness or more consciousness. But the problem is that there is no word in English that I know of that is as accurate. Because enlightenment means to bring the light of consciousness into something. And that's as accurate as I could get. I tried for years to think of other ways of saying Enlightenment Intensive or Enlightenment, because it's such an off-putting word. It has so much connotation with it. It's so unreachable as a word for most people. But I think it's the most accurate. Enlightenment is the direct experience of the truth. There's an assumption there, for those who have not experienced it yet, that there is something outside of the way we experience it that exists beyond our experience of it. It exists of and to itself, beyond how we see, conceive of it, sense it, know of it, believe in it. All of those are by means of, by way of, ways of knowing. Enlightenment is a direct, immediate. The way it's classically described is that there's an at-oneness. There's no difference between the observer and the observed. It is the same in that moment of experience. It's self-evident truth. And we can find it only by clearing the mind, the emotions, preconceived ideas, beliefs, get rid of all of that, and suddenly what is real, right here and now, always in the present, comes into focus. It's always surprising. This incredible thing happening in your heart, opening up more and more, and then suddenly, at some point, you're just there. You're presenting yourself to your partner. You're not answering a question. You're actually being who you are for the first time consciously. And your partner is astounded at this. And there's a tremendous love happening because it's recognizable. You can see it, even though you've never seen it before. You can see it in your partner when it happens to them. You, of course, can feel it. It's self-evident. And then the words come, the answer to the question, and they're irrelevant. I'm me. I'm the source of me. I'm God, whatever level or... And you're presenting it to someone else. This means that you can keep it in life. It's not like going away and being in a cave. And I did. And when I had that experience, it was a simple first stage enlightenment of self. I'm me. I always have been, and here I am, and wow, I'm really happy about this. What a silly answer to come up with 3 days of effort.
Lawrence Noyes has been participating and facilitating the Enlightenment Intensive retreat since the 1970s. He told me about an enlightenment experience that he had on his first Enlightenment Intensive. He describes it as unexpected and most obvious.
I was in a dyad and I directly experienced who I am. It's like I stumbled onto it. It was completely unexpected. It was the second day. I wasn't even thinking much would happen on the second day. I thought we were going to work to some kind of peak on the third day. So the whole thing took me by surprise. And I had one of these experiences that people often have, which is, I know what I've just experienced. I just didn't know that I knew. It's like the who that I experienced was the who that I've been my whole life. You know, I didn't experience a different who, you know. You know, the who am I that I experienced was me. It was the same me that was me when I was a kid, and it was me when I was a teenager, and it wasn't some other me. And this is like a tremendous relief, you know. It sounds naive, and I think in the beginning people are naive, but I had this experience of familiarity and relief and validation that I am the me that I always thought I was. It's just I was growing up in a society that often didn't acknowledge who I am. I grew up in conditions which didn't often communicate to who I am. And so I developed confusions. I thought, you know, in the New England society that I grew up in, it seemed to me there were a lot of efforts to mold me into being something who I wasn't actually being. To be a social person and all the rest of it. And yet, underneath all this, I had this experience of who I am that I experienced a dissonance with. There was who I actually am that was trying to come out, and there was my New England upbringing, which was trying to change that into something else that I didn't experience as being me. And so I left New England with this conflict. I wanted to do the right thing and, you know, be the way that I should be. On the other hand, there was who I actually am that was coming out. On the Enlightenment Intensive, I experienced who I actually am, and it was very, very validating. Also, I knew I'd experienced it.
In his book on the Enlightenment Intensive, Lawrence Noyes includes several first-hand accounts of enlightenment from participants of the Enlightenment Intensive.
All of a sudden, my consciousness shifted to a place where I experienced no separation from anything. I experienced exactly who I am. I experienced the me that I am, and that I always have been and always will be.
It's like your very nature creates life.
Edrid is an Enlightenment
Creates the
master
conscious
and was a
experience
participant at the very first Enlightenment Intensive in 1968.
And there's no...
In this
there's
interview,
no
he talks about his Enlightenment
event
experience.
on any level that doesn't include that. Its completeness is staggering, including any thought, any idea, any feeling, any emotion, any physical object, anything that is in a limitless totalness of it, right? It's you. It's you, it's your nature being revealed, and the other, and life being revealed in some totally true at that point. There is no flake of anything left out. The totalness of it was what was staggering to me, that I create every bit of everything without any exception. There is no way that couldn't be true. It's absolute truth. Right? Total. There is nothing left. And the degree of that, it sends chills. I'm getting chills in my body just contacting the truth of that while I'm speaking of it. It is absolute. It has such a strong feeling of absoluteness. This is it. You know, it's this is all mine. It's not really to deny anybody else's being in on it. It's not saying it's not yours, but my end of it is all of it.
Enlightenment has been experienced throughout time by people in all cultures and countries. It's not owned by any race, religion, or spiritual path. And if you ask 1,000 people to describe their enlightenment experience, you'd hear 1,000 different stories. Each story unique to that individual. However, you'd also hear descriptions that were common to each story. A sense of union or oneness. Instantaneous and sudden. Most obvious. In fact, so obvious that you didn't know you already knew. And timeless. And often imbued with a sense of universal love. And funny. Very funny. With you as the cosmic punchline.
I could not discuss it away because I knew. You know, it was this absolute knowledge, which is not, it had no, because it's not, there's no good or bad, or maybe it's so, or maybe it's the opposite, or maybe it's a third different way, or a fourth or fifth different way. There's no interpretation of it. It was just so, and that was, you know, words just can't do it. I'm right there trying again. It's just so, you know, enlightenment experience is just it. And yeah, you know, I had this firmness in me. I know this. You can't describe it, you know that. You're asking me to do. Books have been written about that.
The Enlightenment experience is truly beyond words. Here, Navin is relating to his partner what he is conscious of during the fullness of his enlightenment experience.
It's all bullshit, man. There's no God. There's only me. There's only you. There's only life. It's all a game, man. It's all a game. It's all a game. And yet I'm sitting here still working out who I am, who you are, what another is, what life is. And this camera is capturing everything.
Though some people are eloquently expressive in using words to convey their inner spiritual experiences, the truth of the Enlightenment experience is that it's actually a divine comedy, overflowing with waves of love that we have for each other and for what we call God.
And we're all little parts of this big conscious being that's beyond us. And for maybe a second, because that's all my puny little body could handle, I got the insight of that enlightenment that, you know, who I am is God. I am God. You're God. Everybody's God.
Here's an enlightenment experience written in the diary of an Italian nun who lived in the 12th century. She was a Franciscan mystic, and her name was Saint Angela of Foligno.
Una volta, mentre pregavo, il mio spirito fu esaltato. Dio mi parlò con tante parole graziose.
One time when I was at prayer, my spirit was exalted. God spoke to me with many gracious words full of love. And when I looked, I saw God, the one who spoke with me. But if you want to know what I saw, I couldn't tell you anything, but that I beheld a fullness and a clearness, and I felt them within me so abundantly that I can in no way describe it or give any likeness of it. For what I beheld was not corporal, but as if in heaven.
Osha Reader took her first Enlightenment Intensive in the late 1960s. She's been facilitating and participating in the process ever since. Here's a poem she wrote that captures the spirit and the essence of the Enlightenment experience.
I'm not ever going to forget who I am. I'm the sound of the bells and the wind that moves through them. I am the journey and the destination. I'm the breath and the body that breathes it. I'm the foot and the earth that touches it. I'm the lover and the beloved. I'm the cat crying and the one who comforts it. Ageless, faceless, timeless, nameless, unborn and undying, constant yet ever-changing. I was before the earth began. I will be after it is gone. God willing, I'm not ever going to forget who I am.
The Enlightenment Intensive is a residential meditation retreat that accelerates the process of enlightenment. It does this by combining self-reflective meditation practices with honest communication and focused listening. It was inspired by 3 unique self-improvement practices. 2 of them are ancient traditional Eastern methods. The third is a modern Western approach.
The first of these ancient ways is a Buddhist meditation retreat developed in Japan around the 12th century. It's called a Zen Sesshin. Zen is the Japanese word for meditation, and Sesshin is the Japanese word that means an intensive retreat. The second ancient way is a yoga meditation technique that's over 10,000 years old. It focuses on the contemplation, who am I? The third part of this inspirational triad is a modern Western self-improvement process that expands one's consciousness by increasing communication, understanding, and awareness between two people.
Tell me what you are.
It's called a dyad, a relating dyad. Dyad is a Greek word that means the number two, in this case, two people. It's two people working together to help each other expand their consciousness through meditation, communication, and understanding.
This synthesis was developed in 1968 by Charles Berner, a spiritual teacher and self-improvement guru in the emerging human potential movement of the late 1950s and 1960s. By the late 1960s, Berner had spent several years helping people to improve their abilities to live life.
He noticed that some people made more self-improvement progress in their ability to live their life than others, and he wondered why. He spoke about his reflections on this problem during a 1993 talk on enlightenment.
And I was baffled by this for a long time. And I had this realization. Now I see why they weren't making any progress. Even though it looked like they were doing the technique, they were responding to the questions, they were following the instructions, they weren't. It's not that answers weren't given. Answers were given. And compliances were taken out, were complied with. But in fact, it was not the individual that did it. It was a personality. So if a personality does a technique and not the actual individuals whose personality that is, then they don't make any progress. That is to say, they didn't know who or what they were. They weren't living from themselves. They were living from a personality. The truth is that there is an actual individual, regardless of name or personality. But they have no sense or experience of that.
Inspired by this new insight that people who knew who they were made the most progress, the fastest progress in self-improvement techniques, Berner continued pondering what could be done to help people know the truth of who they are.
If it was necessary for them themselves to know and be acting from themselves in order for any technique to work, therefore, I said, the first step must be for them to have that experience of who they are. Now, when that occurred to me, I began to immediately remember the ancient yogic question of who am I? And more modern proponent of Ramana Maharshi, the who am I guru, who I remembered as a teenager seeing in a newsreel, black and white newsreel.
Ramana Maharshi lived a simple life in India with a constant stream of local and international visitors who sought his company and spiritual guidance. His advice was always the same. Seek to know yourself. Practice self-inquiry by asking yourself, who am I? Then you'll know everything. Berner also knew about the Japanese Buddhist meditation technique called Rinzai Zen. It's a technique and a school of meditation that's over 3,000 years old. It originally came from China before it was transplanted and became popular in Japan around the 12th century. And it's still practiced today. Rinzai Zen uses a riddle-like question called a koan to help the meditator penetrate into the absolute truths of life. There have been hundreds of koans developed over the years. These riddles or koans break down and bypass the habitual intellectual process of the mind, and they elicit a sudden insight like a flash of lightning or an explosion of fireworks. The riddle can't be solved by reasoning or ideas. It can't be figured out. Its resolution is the Enlightenment experience, always direct, spontaneous, and immediate.
Tell me who you are.
Tell me what life is.
Tell me who you are.
Tell
me what you are.
Berner had been working for many years with a newly developed communication technique that he called relating dyads. These dyads were a structured self-help and self-improvement process that any two people could use. Its purpose is to increase one's ability to relate or connect with others by increasing honest communication, focused listening, and understanding.
With these diverse elements churning within him, Berner dwelled on two problems. First, how to get the average person to directly experience who they are. And second, how to accelerate this process of knowing oneself.
So I thought, well, something should be done about this. What can we do? And I kind of kicked around the ideas for 2-3 months. And then one day I was sitting, laying down, looking out a window at some pine trees. And just ruminating about what could be done. And then I kind of went blank, and then suddenly it occurred to me. Yes, it could be just like, or similar to, a Japanese Zen sesshin, in which people intensely work on who are they, but instead of working alone, it would be in the context of a dyad. So what can be done? So this whole concept of how the dyad would fit together into a sesshin, or an intense period of time, and work on the question, who am I?
Berner had people sit close to each other in the relating dyad format so they could speak to each other anytime they became conscious of something in their meditation. This was a uniquely different meditation practice.
It was unique because up to that point, the vast majority of techniques traditionally used for enlightenment were based principally on isolation, solitude, and withdrawal from life and others. This technique used relating, contact, communication, and interaction.
In my head and this discomfort in my stomach, I still have resistance to another. It's like this constriction in my belly. And like the excitement that comes, the excitement mixed with fear of like a big event. If I was to walk out on stage, or if I was to go on a trip, or meet a new partner who I really liked, that excitement mixed with fear and anticipation.
Berner wrote that by continual interaction with another, by presenting continually to another the results of contemplation of the nature of oneself, the process of enlightenment is accelerated.
And all I'm trying to do is experience who I am. I'm such a fake in the world. Wander around being everything else but who I am, that I've got to go and
By
do.
presenting yourself to another, honestly and authentically, that which is basically untrue about yourself vanishes, and that which is truth remains.
But experience me. It's like the bird says to the other bird, "Oh, I don't know who I am." Am I supposed to sing, or maybe I'm a dog and I should bark? It's ridiculous.
Your mental confusions, preconceived ideas, fears, and fantasies drop away and dissolve to the degree that they are received and understood by another individual. The discovery of the principle that communicating yourself to another increases consciousness and thus accelerates enlightenment is a modern breakthrough and an original contribution to all the techniques of enlightenment. It is this principle that gives the Enlightenment Intensive Retreat the power to produce enlightenment experiences in as little time as a weekend instead of years. The first Enlightenment Intensive began on the weekend of July 2nd, 1968. It was a 5-day Enlightenment Intensive. There were 26 people at that first experimental Enlightenment Intensive. It was held near Lucerne Valley, California, in the high desert foothills of the San Bernardino Mountains, about 125 miles northeast of Los Angeles. That first Enlightenment Intensive was a success, and its effects are still reverberating with us today. Since that first Enlightenment Intensive retreat, tens of thousands of people around the world have done an Enlightenment Intensive. Charles Berner retired from giving Enlightenment Intensives in 1977, but the Enlightenment Intensive continues to be facilitated in countries around the world. Its reputation spreads principally by word of mouth. There is no large company or headquarters promoting the Enlightenment Intensive retreats, and there's no religious creed associated with them. You don't have to believe or disbelieve anything to participate and gain benefit. All you have to do is to be open to the truth of who you actually are.
If you want more information about enlightenment or the Enlightenment Intensive Retreat, or you want to be a participant at a retreat, contact me or talk to the person that gave you this video. Contact details are at the end of the video. May your journey of enlightenment be filled with peace, unbounded joy, and spiritual fulfillment.
Friend by friend. Who is my mother? Who my father? When I am being created friend by friend. I don't remember who I was without you. We have been tending sacred fires for a long time. We are wanderers, drawn by the light of those fires, surrounded by darkness, emerging out of darkness. We enter into the sacred ceremony of each other's life. We sing, we dance, humbled by the power of each other's presence, we pray. We become prayers for each other. We sing praises to each other. And breath by breath, thought by thought, touch by touch, music rises between us. What I was, I am no longer. Shaking with hope, yielding to your hands, I stand trembling before you. Who is my mother? Who my father? When I am being created friend by friend.